Good morning, everybody. It's very nice to be here and to see lots of friends and colleagues from my research time in Europe. And thank you a lot, Thomas, for inviting me to do this keynote. It's been a very interesting time to put together statistics and data from various different countries in the region that I actually currently am living and working. So, we're going to talk about ultra-low fertility in East Asia. So as soon as you see this subtitle, you might be thinking, what baby-making machines are you talking about? So this is just a news report from the Washington Post in 2007. It's about a Japanese minister who actually once made a comment about women being baby-making machines who were failing in their duty to produce children. And another minister said that the country can easily address a national shortage of public daycare if women would just stay home and take care of the kids. So this is just an example from Japan, but it's not restricted to Japan. This kind of mentality is quite prevalent in the entire East Asia. So with women's advanced role and higher education in the society, everyone is sort of not adjusting to this new reality as well as the women themselves. So you see there are actually lots of derogatory terms for single unmarried women above age 30. And it's being used widely, practiced or mentioned by men and women themselves, okay? So this is just a brief background to give you an idea about the social context that gives birth to the lowest low, very, very ultra-low fertility in East Asia. So it's basically a rather rigid system that cannot keep pace with women's rising status. So I'm going to talk a few facts about East Asia. So it contains 1/5 of the world population, and it has incredible rapid decline in fertility with very limited signs of reversal over the past few decades. And it also has this unprecedented and persistent low fertility in one of the most family-oriented social contexts. So, along with these, what precedes all of these rapid decline is the remarkable economic development that took place in the 60s and 70s in the last century. But at the same time, with this kind of rapid modernization, it's also a region that has a very deep-rooted system, cultural system, and it involves women's subordinate role, traditional values, and collective norm that really constrain individuals' options and choices, and somewhat a xenophobic value that really put an emphasis on ethnic homogeneity and basically is close to migration to some extent. So the 5 societies I'm going to talk about today has a big variation in terms of their population size, from a relatively small Hong Kong to a very big country of China. But the 5 societies together, the size of the population is basically more than 2 times of the entire Europe. So it's really a big continent and require more research into it. And the GDP per capita also varies a lot, from less than 10,000 US dollars to more than 45 US dollars. And the variation in development will somewhat explain the fact that China seems to be outlier in a few indicators we're going to look at later. I'm not going to talk about Mongolia and North Korea, largely because of data limitation, and also currently they have replacement level fertility. So that's not something we're going to see. And for Singapore, they're often, this is a country that often been put together with all the East Asian countries, but for various reasons. But strictly speaking, it's in Southeast Asia. But within the Southeast Asia, of course, it's also an outlier because of their very different demographic and economic traits than their neighboring countries. So, first of all, we'll take a look at the very rapid fertility decline since the mid-20th century. So, most of the societies I looked at dipped down to replacement level in the mid-1980s, except China. It came later. So, by the time of 2016, you see that most of the societies are far below replacement level. And for Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea, it's only 1.1 to 1.2. And the remarkable thing is that the declines continued non-stop in South Korea. So in 2017, it's only 1. And it's estimated to be 0.96, which we already heard 2 days ago. And the historical records took place in Taiwan and Hong Kong in 2010 and 2003 of only 0.9 children per woman in terms of period fertility. And there's also this strong sound preference that emerged since 1980 because of the prevalence of the widespread use of contraceptive methods. And for China, it went up very rapidly and to this really remarkable 120-something sex ratio at birth. But for the other countries, Korea and Taiwan, they're also very skewed in terms of sex ratio at birth, Hong Kong as well. Japan, you see less of a strong skewed sex ratio, but there is also some preference in Japan. And the percentage of age 25 to 29 population with tertiary education, you see that it's also very, very rapid increase for most of the societies we're looking at, except for China. And for South Korean women, you see it's almost men and women, almost 80% of them have some kind of tertiary education. For female labor force participation, we see that Korea and Japan, from 1990 to 2016, there's a very rapid increase in terms of women entering the labor force, particularly among those between age 25 and 30s. And the pattern is slightly different for Taiwan. It's like everyone's entering into the labor force more than the previous years, so it's like really fast expansion across all ages. And along with these social changes, there's also this delayed marriage and also foregone marriages. So mean age of marriage, like we know, rose very rapidly, except for China. It's still relatively early in China. Percent never married men at age 50, it rose to almost 26% in Japan as of 2015. For the other countries, they are also quite high. For women, it's not as high as men, but for Hong Kong and Japan, it's about 16% in 2015. And in terms of China, it's literally still universal marriage for women. So why should we care about marriage when studying fertility in East Asia? This must be something that pops out in a lot of European demographers' head. So that it's because marriage is still very closely linked to fertility. So if we first take a look at the case of Taiwan, if you decompose the fertility change from 3.1 to 1.2 over the 40-year period, you see that most of the decline in the 20s, they're driven by declining marriage rates. Okay? So the next thing you would think is that, so no one is having babies outside of marriage? Well, pretty much yes. The non-marital childbearing percentage of non-marital births range from a low of 1.5% in South Korea to 8% in Hong Kong. There are no statistics for China, but we have good reasons to believe it's also very low for various reasons. So with this kind of limited non-marital births, so what's interesting is that we are observing this rising percentage of prenuptial pregnancies or bridal pregnancies. In the US, it's often talked about as shotgun marriage. So what has been happened is that it also rose quite a bit for the 4 societies here I have data for. So these statistics were collected and compiled from various published studies. And some of them were based on marriage cohort, others were based on birth cohort. But we tried to, my assistant and I tried to make it to be a definition of percentage births within 8 months after marriage. So you could be capturing some of the post-marriage conception that was actually delivered as a premature birth, but it gives you a sense of this increasing change in terms of bridal pregnancies. So with premarital conceptions rising, one would want to ask about, so what about cohabitation? So these are interlinked family behaviors. Cohabitation in East Asia has also been rising, but the overall level is of course much lower than in Europe. So on the other hand, we have quite limited data on this behavior because of data collection effort and also people reluctant to report their cohabiting experience because of social stigma, all of these concerns. But so we know in 2004, Japan has a prevalence rate about 10 to 15% among adult population, and for Taiwan is about 20%. And when we also compile various studies and put things together, we see that in terms of cohort experience, it's rising in general. So with all of these information in your head, you would want to know, so what are the factors that led to this kind of changes in fertility and marriage in East Asia? So there's various reasons that have been put forth trying to understand, unpack the phenomenon. So the common ones we've heard many, many times is this modernization, economic development that bring about all these changes in women's role and how opportunity costs became much higher and more difficult for them to form unions. On the other hand, there was a tempo effect, but as you can see, quantum actually also play a very significant role in the really rapid decline of fertility. Childcare and education made children very expensive, and there's also delayed policy responses in all of these societies. There are deteriorating labor market conditions when all of these societies enter into post-industrial context. So the young people are suffered from this new social reality. And finally, there's this stalled gender revolution, and that's something I would spend a little bit more time on today. So what we're talking about here is this persistent patriarchal values that is prevalent and still pretty much the norm in the region. So what it does is not just having this understanding of what men and women should be doing. It actually affects many parts of how the society is functioning. So on the one hand, it lowers the likelihood of single men and women meeting each other and form partnerships. Okay. So it also exacerbates the work-family conflict, particularly for women, and sometimes for men as well. It affects division of labor at home, which is not very helpful for having more children. It also has negative impact on policy effectiveness, the postnatalist ones. Okay, so we'll take a look at how women's role at home has changed slowly. So you see that in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, women still really shoulder the bulk of domestic chores, even with their rising socioeconomic status. Whereas division of labor in China and Hong Kong seem to be better, in a sense, because of the socialist regime and also for Hong Kong, the colonial past. They all probably play some role in making the division of labor more egalitarian. In terms of how it affects pronatalist policies, in the case of Taiwan, I think they are too much focused on raising fertility. It's like they assume everybody will get married. But the thing is, marriage is declining, okay? And it's not really replaced by non-marital births, and cohabitation is rising slowly. So the core thing is declining marriage rates and the potential aversion of this childbearing, son-bearing pressure among women. They don't want to go through that, okay? So one thing about the parental leave policy that has been implemented since 2002, It has been considered by many laborers in Asia or in Taiwan as a visible yet unreachable benefit. And why? Because employers, particularly those from private firms with small and medium-sized companies, they can, put out punitive measures to their employees in a way that really circumvent the labor regulations for benefiting from parental leave. And women, they fear about all kinds of repercussions that can come from with their uptake of such policy. And men as well, they get teased by their employers. Oh, why are you gonna spend time taking care of kids at home? It's your wife's job, So they're discouraged from sharing more at home. And so what we see is that there are only 3% of new parents who take the full maximum eligible parental leave, for parental leave that they are eligible to, and 60% only take 6-month leave. So the percent of men taking leave is less than 5% in 2006, and only rose to 17% in 2017. For all new parents, the percentage is about a quarter in 2009 and about half in 2017. On the other hand, there's also the salary gap between men and women, so it's cheaper in a sense for women to take the leave than for the men to take parental leave. Men's economic burden in this male breadwinner kind of model really also hamper their uptake of parental leave. So these are two aspects that we look at how patriarchy affects division of labor and policy effectiveness. Next, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we're talking about when we say Confucian culture and patriarchy. So it's a culture that stresses the importance of structure and hierarchy in social relationships, and it values patrilineal family system. Okay, so this kind of family lineage, it continued along the male descendants, and they're often associated with various kinds of practices. First thing is this very local living arrangements after marriage. So all women, after they get married, pretty much they have to adapt themselves to a brand new family in the husband's family. And they shoulder the care of the parents-in-law. And it's not really the same on the other hand. Like if the husband take care of the woman's parents, it's considered, oh, you marry a very nice husband, but it's not their obligation. So women really have to change a lot. Investment in daughters sometimes, because of that, is considered expensive and unnecessary because your daughter basically marry out of the family. So we have two verbs for marry. In English, you say, John marries Jane, or Jane marries John. But in Chinese or I don't know, the Japanese, there are two different verbs. So it shows you the process is different. So along with this thing is the son preference that we always saw earlier. And this is very important because of very recent, and one of them is ancestral worship. So what we're talking about here is that in China or in Taiwan, Hong Kong, in Singapore, lots of these societies, when you see the tombstones of your grandparents or even your parents, only the sons or the grandsons have their names inscribed on the stone. No daughters, no granddaughters. So in a sense, it's the son who's taking care of the ancestral graveyards and also this thing. So parents and grandparents worry if they don't have son, no one's gonna take care of various things after they pass away. And it's the same in Japan. The elder son is the one who's in charge of the annual visit to ancestral graveyard. So this really create tremendous pressure on married women. So they will get all these messages from parents-in-law or grandparents-in-law. You really need to bear a son, otherwise I won't be able to see our ancestors of the Lin family when I go to heaven one day. And it's really they have all kinds of narratives that tells you, oh, this is really important. And also the subordinate role of women. So in the Confucian teaching, in a sense, there's a saying of 3 obedience of women. A woman should obey her father as a daughter in the natal home, and her husband as a wife in the marriage, and her sons in widowhood. So you kind of get an idea of what this is all about. So subordinate role of women. So we're going to take a look at the extreme case of migrant wives in East Asia, and I'm going to show you some statistics in Taiwan. So there are quite a bit of migrant wives coming from neighboring less developed countries since 1990 in the case of Taiwan. The common anecdotes you hear from these women who marry Taiwanese men is that they have lots of in-law issues, and they're discriminated against, and they are maltreated in a sense. So, but a lot of them were expected to endure all of these treatments because of the filial piety concept in the culture. So it's not uncommon to find runaway brides, and the husband have to end up filing for divorce in the court because their wife just disappeared, from the horizon. So this kind of migrant brides who marry native Taiwanese, Japanese, or Korean men, they often have lower fertility than their native counterparts. This is something unusual because in the European context, migrants tend to have more children. So you see that in Taiwan, if you compare women under age 40, they basically have very similar fertility level and sometimes even slightly higher. But if you look at age 40 plus of the native and migrant women, native women across all educational categories bear more children than the migrant women. So the fertility, like I said, of migrant women is generally higher. But why not in the East Asian context? So there's prejudice and discrimination that really make it worse for women's status at home. Particularly, most of them marry to lower SES families where the men have problem finding a wife in their own country. And their maltreatment in the marital home and complaints about being viewed as childbearing machines or the instrument to continue the family line really is abound. So lower fertility among these migrants, they even persist when we take into account spousal age gap. So quite a bit of these women marry much older men in the receiving countries, but the gap still persists. So in a way, I see this as a paradox. So we all said that women's rising role in the society, the more education, higher employment hampers their fertility level. But what about these migrant women? They have generally lower education, they have limited career prospect in their receiving countries, but still they are not really bearing as many children as one would expect, or having the kind of fertility level that resemble their home country. So there's something at work, and I believe a big chunk of it is the rigid system that's really making it difficult to build families. So with all of these things that we just mentioned, you will be thinking, oh, so all of these never change. Of course they're changing, and they're changing slowly. So if we look at the Taiwan Social Change Survey, you see that between 1995 and 2015, actually more and more people think that newlyweds, they don't have to live with the husbands or their in-laws. They should establish their own residence. And also, more and more of them, particularly women, they think it's fine to argue with your mother-in-law. Whereas in the past, it's considered just big no-no. You just don't do that. Your husband can even divorce you for that reason. And also, more of them believe it's okay to get a divorce when couples have compatibility issues. But there's one thing that persists and even got reinforced. That is the son preference. So in a sense, it worsened under this fertility squeeze when people are having smaller and smaller family. So you see here, in 1994, the TFR in Taiwan is about 1.7, 1.8. 2011, 2016, it went down to 1 to 1.1. And so with smaller families, there are more people thinking that we should have at least one son to continue the family lineage. And somehow this goes along with the really rapid increase in son preference and skewed sex ratio that we see in China after the implementation of one-child policies. So it's this tremendous pressure to have a male descendant. Okay, so then I want to talk a little bit about, so why do fewer people marry or have children in East Asia? So you often hear single men and women say they're not married yet because they haven't met a suitable partner. So you will wonder, so what factors interfere with compatibility between single men and women or affect the chance that they meet each other? Is it because of the persistent hypergamous ideals, or is it because even when women are willing to marry down, men have their pride to guard? So you don't know what is really operating. So I think we need more in-depth qualitative research to really look at the process that's going on in terms of how couples meet and form partnerships. And on the other hand, I think this very local marriage practice, son preference, and persistent gender discrimination at workplaces, they could have all, prompt women to invest more time at work, because that's something that really make them fulfill their own dreams as an independent career woman. But oftentimes these are at odds with forming unions or even having kids. And finally, there could be reason for lack of ideal marriage role models in parental generations, because you see your grandparents' generation, your parents' generation, this kind of unequal division of labor, and how the mothers basically have to take care of everything. So a lot of younger generations of women think this is not really the type of life I want to pursue, so I need to be careful when selecting the potential partner, so that I don't, fall into the same situation like my mother or my grandmother. So with these potential reasons that lower the marriage prospects of younger generations, a group of demographers, actually a project led by Albert here, he's also in the audience. I'm also part of the group, and also Sepsia, so 3 of us are here. We compile data on marriage propensity scores in 5 Asian countries, or 4 East Asian societies, to look at what the marriage percent ever married or single would look like with population projection data. So we see that if the 2010 marriage propensity persists, we're very likely to see a rapid increase of singlehood for Korean and Taiwanese men and women, while for Japan it's somehow stabilized after 2020, and for China the increase is relatively limited when compared to these other countries. So fertility, if we have all these projections in mind, we will expect fertility to stay low. One, if non-marital birth remains rare, and second, if society at large is slow to adapt to women's new roles. Unlike Europe, replacement migration is rarely considered as a policy option. So what can be done? This is something we need to think about. And in addition to pronatalist policies, I think governments really need to think more about what we can do to improve the well-being, the welfare of individuals in ultra-low fertility. One of them is the social infrastructure needed for rising share of lone person households and potential social consequences of excessive unmarried low SES bachelors in the society. And it's already happening in China, in a lot of the rural areas. the implication of thinning kinship when we have fewer and fewer children. And finally, this is something that's somehow connected to Melinda's talk yesterday. It's just something that I thought about. So if the better educated women have higher risk of childlessness, does it mean that there will be like somehow a selection of genes from mothers of on average lower education? And what does that mean to in the long run? So I think that's my talk for today.